amend 3A, Section 3 of the Act, and provide for one of the objects of the Act, which is what I've just referred to and spent a lot of time trying to explain, which is a legal framework on the international market mechanisms on carbon markets, Mr. Speaker. In that, I've explained, Mr. Speaker, that while the rest of the countries that are competing with us have set in place this regulatory framework to be able to monitor and know what are the carbon trade projects that are going on in their country, we didn't have this legal framework, Mr. Speaker, and therefore that is a proposal that we are having here, so that monetary constraints, Mr. Speaker, and revenue generation that is coming, that continues to face us as a country, Mr. Speaker, when you try to participate and meet our own quota in the national determined contributions, Mr. Speaker, shall be a thing of the past. We shall be able to know this is the amount that a specific company has invested. And you know, there are many global companies, Mr. Speaker, that operate out of Kenya. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you will struggle to find any serious leading corporate entity globally, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't have operations in Kenya. For reasons that you all know, this is a large economy. Of course, this is a place that previously, I know we've had challenges previously, and quite a number of them have left, but many are beginning to troop back, Mr. Speaker, into the country. And therefore, this is where I want to draw the attention of my colleagues. While you find countries like, not countries, but companies like Microsoft, Unilever, all of them having operations in Kenya, because of the lack of this regulatory framework and the demand that you're making on these companies, in other countries such as Tanzania next door, and that's why I've mentioned to the figures of what they've been able to unlock in the last 1 year alone, Mr. Speaker, they are able to put projects that are measurable, Mr. Speaker. But in Kenya, for the lack of this legal framework, they know you can easily get by and, you know, nobody will ask you any difficult questions. But that will be a thing of the past. Immediately we conclude on this bill today, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I want to urge the importance and the urgency of doing it, concluding on this particular bill today, so that when the world comes to Nairobi next week, when we have more than 30 presidents that are attending the Africa Climate Summit, they know that Kenya is under a new regime of law. And perhaps it's important that I address that point, Mr. Speaker, because I know many people have asked and said, Majority Leader, why were we not given additional time and all these things? While it is important to listen to those particular concerns, I think, Mr. Speaker, the importance and the significance of the first continental summit on ways and means through which Africa or the rest of the global south, Mr. Speaker, will stand to benefit in this space of carbon credits is happening here in Nairobi. We need to be under the proper regime of law, Mr. Speaker. It will be a great absurdity that the world will be here speaking about carbon credits, yet the host country itself will not have ratified or domesticated this particular law. And that is the essence of Clause 4 of the bill, Clause 3 of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Clause 4 of the bill seeks to amend Section 6 of the Act and insert a new paragraph to provide for the guidance and policy discretion on carbon markets to the national and county governments, the public, and other stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. I had mentioned, and this is an important place for you, us as the House that are defenders of devolution, Mr. Speaker, that it was important, without Clause 4 being included into the bill, without bringing county governments into this conversation, Mr. Speaker, then it would have been an idle venture, Mr. Speaker, because we know all these projects, they take place in our counties. All the mitigative measures, Mr. Speaker, of the action that we need to do as a people, they are done by people in the grassroots, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it will have been unfair for us to have a bill that doesn't bring the nexus of national and county governments, the public, and other stakeholders, as is being done under Clause 4. Clause 5 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 7 of the Act, which is to align and provide for membership of the Council that is being set up for better operations, as well as the same. Clause 10, 11, and 12, Mr. Speaker, I'll try and go quickly after. I'm alive, Mr. Speaker, to the fact of a kind of interest that this bill will generate, and perhaps members will want to speak about it, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I don't intend to take the full 1 hour, but I'll try and quickly rush so that maybe the rest will be said by the seconder, the chairperson of the committee, Mr. Speaker, of the additional things that probably I may have forgotten. During his time of seconding, he may mention perhaps some of the things that I easily could have forgotten or rushed over, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time. So I mentioned that Clause 10, 11, and 12 of the bill seeks to amend Section 15 and 16 of the Act to empower the Cabinet Secretary to make regulations as the Council's mandate is of a higher level of providing overarching policy and the National Climate Change Coordination Mechanism. There is an insertion of a new Part 5 which provides for regulation of carbon markets. This is very important, good people. I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that in this conversation on the climate issues that face the world, there is a lot of hypocrisy. I have mentioned further, Mr. Speaker, in my opening remarks that unfortunately, the leading polluters, the people who are supposed to pay the most because they have gotten us fast where we are, unfortunately wield a lot of power on this globe, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, because of the immense power that they wield, if you do not set it by regulation and ensure that you have a way through which the Cabinet Secretary is able to bring to our delegated legislation committees, Mr. Speaker, regulations frequently, so that if you have a particular project that is being introduced into the country, Mr. Speaker, you set up ways and means of monitoring and ensuring that those organizations, the corporations, anybody that wants to participate in the carbon market, Mr. Speaker, is monitored, and whatever they pledge, because people talk a lot, Mr. Speaker. I have mentioned that if you follow the conversations in Glasgow, and I think London thereafter, Mr. Speaker, it's only eventually the last 1 or 2 years, leading up to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt early this year, Mr. Speaker, that people have started being serious with each other and realizing that just coming, putting on your nice little suits, speaking on all the nice conversations about what needs to be done and retreating back to wait for the summit next year, is it going to get us to a better place? That people have become serious, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, even us, by way of regulations, Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that we have, first of all, people who, especially the institutions that will do the monitoring, Mr. Speaker. And I know, I saw people present, Mr. Speaker. I think I happened to have caught on to the presentation while it was being made yesterday. And I saw part of the memorandum that had been sent, that there are Kenyans actually who are taking this conversation seriously, and they were saying, instead of giving it to the Ministry of Environment to be the regulator or the people that measure the practice of a carbon market, why don't you liberalize it and leave it to the private sector? In any case, it has been found to be more effective than government. I think that's a conclusion that we far reach as a country. And while I agree with them, Mr. Speaker, I think perhaps, and this is something which the importance of Clause 10 and 11 and 12 on the powers that are being given to the Cabinet Secretary, while the overarching regulator of this space and market, Mr. Speaker, will remain to be the government of Kenya, I think it will be better if they license, and that is something which they can address when they eventually bring the regulations here, Mr. Speaker, provide the mechanism and the framework through which you can leave it to the private sector, people who have the competence of measuring this carbon market and who have been part and parcel of this conversation far longer than many of our officials say at the ministry level, so that we ensure that nobody takes advantage of us as a country, Mr. Speaker. Because if you're not careful, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, people will come here and will set up organizations, and like we know, just like happens in the NGO world, Mr. Speaker, people quote huge figures in the global capitals, the great capitals of the world, of how they are doing great community impact projects in this republic. Yet the truth of the matter is that they are on holiday. They just come here, lounge in five-star hotels, and return back to their country and say, oh, we've just come back from doing a lot of work in Africa, and that kind of, such kind of things, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is important, and I hope that when the Cabinet Secretary eventually sends regulations on the people that will monitor the national determined contributions, and secondly, those that are participating in the carbon markets, Mr. Speaker, they'll set up local enterprises. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is such an important natural resource because the rest of the world doesn't have it. They're craving it. That's why they're investing here as a way of offsetting. You know, Mr. Speaker, in this conversation of the climate change, I think people made commitments in Paris And people are happy because they thought maybe nobody will be keen enough to follow through the agreements that the rest of the world signed onto those protocols. And subsequently, when they followed and went and did the same in Kyoto, in Japan, Mr. Speaker, they imagined that it will never get to a time such as now, where because of the great ravaging effects, everybody is now saying, we made commitments, let us live through to our commitments. If we are not careful to monitor through these commitments, Mr. Speaker, people will take advantage of us. And that's why I say, because this is such a strategic national asset, these are such regulations that perhaps when it comes to the committees of our colleagues who sit in delegated legislation, you demand even that the companies that will be licensed to monitor this market be 100% local. Let them be fully owned by Kenyans, because it's only a Kenyan that believes in their own country that will want the best for their own nation. At the end of the day, if you're not invested somewhere, and I think it's the same principle that applies, it's very difficult. The reason I cannot run, Mr. Speaker, to be senator of Tana River is because I don't own even a cat there. And if I go there, people will ask you, what do you know about this particular place? Same principle should apply. That if you want to monitor the market here, let it be done. And there is no lack of competent Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, who understand this space that can do it. And therefore, I will be looking forward to subsequently, after the Africa Climate Summit here is done and they send the regulations to Parliament, that we ensure that we lock this space purely for Kenyan markets, Mr. Speaker. Clause 15 of the bill, as I move to conclude, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend Section 35 of the bill to renumber the existing provisions of subsection 1 and introduce an amendment to indicate the sections that does not apply to the entities that have existing carbon projects for a period of a year. I like that it is being monitored year on year, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, if you just get a single approval and leave it, Mr. Speaker, at that, it is very possible that people will do funny things like I have mentioned. They'll, of course, quote and book it on their books. Looks beautiful before their investors that they are offsetting carbon credits in Kenya or whichever part of the world, but then don't follow it subsequently with other investments. You know, after commissioning of a project, Mr. Speaker, if we measure it year on year, as is being provided here, Mr. Speaker, you're able to track progress. That this project at the beginning of the year 2023 was at 50%. Now, in 2024, it is at 65%, and it's projected to be concluded on time. That's the importance of clause number 15. Clause 16 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, insert new paragraphs on the regulations of carbon markets, carbon trading, carbon registries, and non-market approaches, Mr. Speaker. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, while carbon trading may not be a standalone solution in combating climate change, I don't want to be a snake oil salesman, Mr. Speaker, where somebody will quote or look at the Hansard a few years down the line and say, Majority Leader, when you're moving this bill in 2023, you made such a rosy presentation about it that we thought this was a silver bullet that will conclude all our climate area challenges, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that this alone will solve that particular problem, but it is such an important milestone. It gives us such momentum, Mr. Speaker, that jointly together with other national efforts and the things that are being done by other brilliant Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, which I'm aware we shall be seeing next week at KICC, Mr. Speaker, we shall be able to come up with better strategies, Mr. Speaker, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which will impact climate change, Mr. Speaker. We are aware, Mr. Speaker, that many Kenyans actually have made huge sacrifices for many years. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact, for example, and many times when we speak about issues of climate change, we celebrate the work of the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai, and her contribution to us as a country. But I know for a fact that besides her, there are many Kenyans, some even not local, and perhaps they challenge my earlier theory on making it 100% local. I know, and I want to celebrate somebody like, Mr. Speaker, Bob Munro of the Mathare Youth Sports Association, Mr. Speaker. A Canadian, came into the country in 1987, has lived with us, working with communities in Mathare and all over Eastlands in Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, using sports, but more importantly, challenging, writing papers, informing various governments, Mr. Speaker, on how to combat climate change. His work for the last 35 years can be felt across not only just here Mr. Speaker. I know for a fact, despite, unfortunately, and we do not celebrate such good Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, for the work that he did. You know, a few weeks or months ago, he came to my office and told me, unfortunately, Senator, despite all the work that I've done, I have, because of my involvement in football, and you know the kind of politics that comes with football, I have never been granted a Kenyan passport, or even sometimes I struggle even to get my work permit. Somebody who's worked here for 35 years was very instrumental in ensuring that we have the UN offices in Gigiri, UNEP offices in Gigiri, Mr. Speaker, because of their contribution. We need to celebrate that such Kenyans, people who have gone out of their way to make significant contribution. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I will be, perhaps when we do the parliamentary honors meeting, Mr. Speaker, you know, many times when you do that meeting, we celebrate Kenyans who have made significant contribution. I'll be putting forward his name, the name of Bob Mundro, because of his contribution to the climate space in our country, despite the fact that he's not Kenyan, but has lived here for the last close to 40 years, working with communities in our slums and in different parts of the country, has attracted investment here, to be celebrated during this year's Mashujaa Day. And so many of you, so that we challenge other Kenyans like you, lead this charge, colleague senators. I want to encourage all of us that set up community champions, even in your own local schools, have scouts that work and do work and follow the eminent work of Kenyans that have set the trail in this climate space. Kenyans like Wangare Maathai, Bob Murro that I have just mentioned, Mr. Speaker, so that we have a greater environment and don't just speak about climate, Mr. Speaker, when looking back and saying what should have been changed. We can influence the future, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't just look back and meet, Mr. Speaker, such as the time that we are meeting now in Nairobi, to try and rectify what can go wrong. It is possible to influence the future, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, with those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge honorable senators to support this bill. We move and conclude on it so that next week, when 30 or 40 heads of states that have confirmed their attendance to the Africa Climate Summit come into the country, they appreciate and know that Kenya as a nation is serious on this conversation on climate change. And we maintain our position as a leader of Africa in the climate space, Mr. Speaker. You know that we lead on that particular front, including even in our energy sector, Mr. Speaker, something worth being celebrated about, that we are leading in terms of percentage of clean energy. Of course, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but we have done well as a country. You know, we don't celebrate ourselves many times enough for the good work that we have done, and perhaps we can learn and build on. Mr. Speaker, with these remarks, I beg to move and request Senator Methu, the chairperson on our Land and Environment Committee, to second this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to second this particular motion, Mr. Speaker. And from the onset, I would want to say that I'm quite surprised that I didn't know that Senator Cheriot, the leader of majority, has that in-depth knowledge on matters environment and climate change. I feel very challenged that he has understood the meat and crust of why we actually need to do this particular amendment. And as I second Mr. Speaker, I don't want to say, a lot of issues that I actually need to say have been said by my brother, Senator Cheriot. But I want to answer a question that is being asked by most of my colleagues, and it has been a question to all the members of the Lands, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee on why we actually need to change this law. Mr. Speaker, all of us keep mentioning, and we base our argument, Article 42 of the Constitution, that every person has a right to a clean and healthy environment, Mr. Speaker. But then there is a process to it, Mr. Speaker. And where there have been some naysayers on the climate and environment space, Mr. Speaker, it is then apparent that all of us now agree that challenges that come with global warming are here with us, Mr. Speaker. everywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, our climate and climatic way of how we are used to has changed drastically, Mr. Speaker, from prolonged droughts, Mr. Speaker, to some places, Mr. Speaker, suffering from very serious droughts and famine, Mr. Speaker. And we, as the people of Kenya and the Kenyan government, Mr. Speaker, when we ratified the Paris Agreement, just as my brother Senator Aaron has mentioned, on December 26, 2016, Mr. Speaker, we set our target of carbon emissions to less than 2 degrees Celsius, or less than actually 1.5%, Mr. Speaker. But then, what Senator Cheriot has said, the challenge that we faced, and out of the 13 memoranda that we received as a committee, Mr. Speaker, they are speaking to this particular question: why do we need to do this bill? And the Minister for Environment, because this is a government-sponsored bill, when she appeared before us, that was a very pertinent question. Why do we need this bill? Why do we need to regulate the space around carbon trading, Mr. Speaker? There is something that is very clear in the minds of everybody here, that even as we speak about carbon trading, there are 116 organizations that are dealing with carbon credit, Mr. Speaker. And just as Aaron Cheriot has rightfully said, actually the statistics of our share as Kenya in the African market of the carbon credit is 20%. We got 20% of everything that was paid in Africa from this carbon market, Mr. Speaker. But none of the people who are here, or very few of the people who are here, Mr. Speaker, have the clarity of how this money was paid, who was paid, and how they were paid, Mr. Speaker. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we were seated here, and the senator for Machakos was asking the cabinet secretary, now that carbon harvesting is happening in Chulu, I think some place called Chulu in Machakos, Mr. Speaker, what was the space around how this money was paid, Mr. Speaker? The senator for Taita Taveta is here. He was asking how 120 million was paid to a ranch, and they were just told this is your share of the carbon credit. This is how we traded. This is how much we traded, but they did not know how much was paid. They were just given some blanket whatever. So when we speak about clarity, Mr. Speaker, you will be surprised today that there is a company that is running in Siaya, and they are doing carbon credit on behalf of the people of Siaya, and not even the leadership of Siaya knows, or even the leadership of Nyandarua, or the members of Parliament who are in this Senate, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, that the highest payment was made to Kwale County, Mr. Speaker. The senator for Kwale is a member of my committee, Mr. Speaker. He does not understand how, or these companies around Shimba Hills traded on behalf of the people of Kwale. How the money that we got as Kenya, the 15 billion, how it was distributed amongst the communities, Mr. Speaker. So when we speak up to ensuring that we regulate this space about carbon credit, we want to have a clarity of how this trade is happening. Mr. Speaker, again, there's an issue about integrity and transparency, Mr. Speaker. And where government has a responsibility under Article 69 of protecting communities, Mr. Speaker, then they cannot protect communities without a framework. They cannot protect communities without the tools of trade, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, because we are not operating in isolation, Mr. Speaker, we then have to align to international commitments, Mr. Speaker. Because Senator Cheriot has rightly put it, Mr. Speaker. Are we the one that caused this problem, Mr. Speaker? No. There are other peoples that have greatly contributed to the global warming that we are facing as a country, Mr. Speaker. And 186 countries have committed to the Paris Agreement, Mr. Speaker. But then, are we getting the rightful share of what we are supposed to do so that we ensure we manage this crisis? No, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because we do not have the right framework, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, why we actually need this amendment is to ensure that we engage a broader range of stakeholders just as I have said, stakeholders are from different. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we were saying that such a stakeholder has written a memoranda. We are this company that trades this place. Nowhere nobody in the ministry knows that they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in government knows they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in the local community knows where they are operating under what space, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is something that will be addressed by this bill, Mr. Speaker. Another point, Mr. Speaker, that I want to raise is that we need to support Kenya's emission reduction goals, Mr. Speaker. Now that we have placed it at 1.5%, Mr. Speaker, we then have to get a framework of how we are getting there, Mr. Speaker. Not somebody doing it in their corner there, another person doing it in their corner there, another person doing it in their corner there. We have to get a legal framework around which then we shall be able to achieve these particular goals of the reduction of emissions, Mr. Speaker. So finally, Mr. Speaker, because I also want to allow my other colleagues who are here, there's something that has been mentioned about the objects that will come, and we really had pressed the Cabinet Secretary yesterday when she appeared before our committee, Mr. Speaker, on then how communities will benefit from this, so that then government does not become a prohibitor in this kind of, in this market, Mr. Speaker. And I would also want to agree with the Senator General, because how these monies will be shared, Mr. Speaker, will then come in the regulations that will come. I would want to ask my brothers again in the Delegated Legislation Committee, Mr. Speaker, to then step up on behalf of the communities, Mr. Speaker, so that the communities can be able to benefit as they should in as far as these particular earnings are concerned, Mr. Speaker. So, without saying so much, Mr. Speaker, allow me to end it there. I ask my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, even as we say that this bill has been rushed, Mr. Speaker, as a country, we are honored to host the whole continent next week, Mr. Speaker. And when we pass, and if we pass this bill, and I beg and I seek the indulgence of my colleagues that we pass this bill, Mr. Speaker, we shall become, I think, the second country in the whole continent, Mr. Speaker, and then we shall be leading from the front, Mr. Speaker. Our president chairs the African Working Group on Environment, Mr. Speaker. And it is out of this honor, Mr. Speaker, that we are hosting the summit here, Mr. Speaker. Kenya is a powerhouse, Mr. Speaker, and that is how we control the biggest space around carbon trading in the last financial year, Mr. Speaker, controlling over 20% of what was given in the whole of this continent, Mr. Speaker. So I urge my colleagues that let us lead from the front. When the other countries come to this country, Mr. Speaker, let us take pride that we have shown the way, we have led by the front, and we have an existing legislation in this regard, Mr. Speaker. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, allow me to second.
Honorable Senators, I now proceed to propose the question. Senator Methu, kindly. I proceed to propose the question that the Climate Change Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 42 of 2023 be now read a second time. Senator Enoch.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to make a contribution to this bill. From the onset, Mr. Speaker, I support the bill. Mr. Speaker, so that we put our house in order. And because this is an opportunity for us to show true bipartisanship, I would have expected that the leader of majority would have asked the leader of minority to second the bill, in which case then we would have carried the hours together. Then the able senator, the chairman of the Environment Committee, would have come first to make a contribution to the bill.
Speaker, next time the Leader of Majority calls a special sitting, then consideration must be given to the minority side. Speaker, having said that, I say that in this bill, we have an opportunity to make a lot of things that have gone wrong to make them right. Speaker, I'm encouraged that in a few days, the Global South, in fact, the entire world, will be coming to Kenya. So Kenya will be hosting the globe to discuss matters environment, to discuss matters climate change. And Mr. Speaker, this presents us as a leadership in this country, then to put our best foot forward as we receive the world to discuss climate change issues. The Speaker, while moving this bill, the majority leader made reference to a distinction between planting trees and growing trees. The Speaker, I think a time has come, and now is, when all of us as leaders then must begin to think of viable initiatives that will culminate in every plant that is planted, every tree that is planted, to grow to maturity. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to say that we want to plant 15 billion trees. It's achievable. But out of those 15 billion trees that we plant, how many will grow to maturity? That is a conversation that we must have as leaders. And the beauty about climate, Mr. Speaker, is that it knows no side. It doesn't know the leadership in the minority or the majority. It affects all of us equally. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to come up with initiatives to grow trees. Mr. Speaker, I heard yesterday, and I've been hearing this story, that El Nino is on the way. The Speaker, we must find a silver lining, even in that extreme weather condition. This is the opportunity now for regions of this country that are known to be rain deficit to move with speed and put in place measures to grow as many trees as possible. And in fact, even as we grow those trees, then we encourage sections of this country, counties in this country, to formally enter in the carbon market. Mr. Speaker, going to the bill, I want to say that this bill has come to us a bit late. We must be our own critics. We must be able to look ourselves in the mirror and tell us the truth. That, Mr. Speaker, we are amending a bill that was passed in 2016. Matters climate move very fast. This actually should be a fourth or a fifth amendment to the 2016 bill. But, Mr. Speaker, because we are it, we have to deal with it as it is. And as we deal with it, Mr. Speaker, we are actually in a race against time in the eyes of the world to tick boxes, because that's what we are doing. Now we have visitors coming in a few days. We have to be seen to belong, so we have to pass this bill. For that reason, we have called a special sitting of the Senate so that we fast-track this bill. Mr. Speaker, going forward, it is only important that as leadership we are proactive on matters that affect us as a nation. The Speaker, we are, as a country, we are a state party to the Paris Agreement on climate change, and so we must lead ourselves by example, knowing, the Speaker, that we are the headquarters of the United Nations Environment Program. We in the entire world, when on matters environment, the entire world, they bows before Nairobi. The Speaker, for that reason, for that reason alone. And you know, Mr. Speaker, for us to host UNEP is not an easy thing. Germany, you know, all of us know that Germany has really been pushing to relocate UNEP to Bonn. They have even constructed an entire headquarters. They're just waiting for that day that will get a node to relocate UNEP from Nairobi to Bonn in Germany. The Speaker, because of that, we must be very, very proactive on matters of environment as a country. The bill, Mr. Speaker, so that I don't take a lot of time on it, the bill is though late, is timely to the extent that it seeks to mainstream the role and functions of the youth within the council, the Climate Change Council. I'm actually, Mr. Speaker, taken aback because the Mother Bill, the Mother Act, did not think that the youth should have a role in the council. This amendment recognizes the role of young people in the council. And this is important because when we talk, even when we talk agriculture, Mr. Speaker, we all say we want to make agriculture young, we want to make farming young, we want to encourage young people when they leave school, instead of going to look for jobs, they can employ themselves in the farms. Now, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity, because the young people have been mainstreamed in the council, for them to even be encouraged to start tree plantations and enter the carbon market and begin to earn from it, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, this bill, when it comes to regulations, I will be asking the Committee on Delegated Legislation to also be proactive in their engagement with the Cabinet Minister, Secretary responsible for environment, to ensure that, Mr. Speaker, these things, beyond the definitions that are given in this bill, it is important, especially for the county governments, to be taken through a capacity building initiative to understand how to deal with carbon credits, carbon market, and all those jargons around the carbon trading, Mr. Speaker. It is important that county governments will understand how they can establish county forests, and how those county forests could actually begin to become a major source of own source revenue. You know, Mr. Speaker, devolution, as we know it, is supposed to be progressive in a way that at some point, county governments should be generating a lot more revenue for themselves and their expenditure than the money that they receive from the exchequer. This is an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for county governments to enter into the carbon market, to establish as many forests as we can, to begin trading in carbon from their own resources. Mr. Speaker, with those many, many remarks, I support the bill.
Senator Mungatana.
Bwana Spika, napenda kuchukua nafasi hii kupatia asante kwa kunipa nafasi na mimi nitoe mawazo kuhusu mjadala huu wa mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Bwana Spika, kule Tana River kuna kabila inaitwa Wata, ambao kwa miaka mingi walikuwa wanapata maisha kutoka kwa msitu. Na sio wao peke yake, Bwana Spika, lakini pia kuna makabila mengi pale kwetu ambao wanafanya maisha yao kutumia misitu. Wiki iliyopita, Bwana Spika, nilikuwa sehemu ya Tana River inaitwa Chara, na huko, Bwana Spika, watu wamejitolea kusimamia misitu, kuijenga misitu. Mr. Speaker, Bwana Spika, hata ile tunaita mangrove forest kizungu, wananchi wanajitolea kupitia kwa vikundi vyao kujenga na kuvianzisha tena ile misitu ambayo inaharibika kwa ajili ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Shida ambayo iko, Bwana Spika, ni kwamba wananchi hawa hawapati chochote kutokana na hizi kazi wanazofanya. Kitu ambacho kinafanyika mpaka leo, Bwana Spika, ni kwamba kuko na promises ama ahadi ambazo zinatokea kutoka kwa Wizara ya Mazingira, lakini hakuna kitu ambacho wananchi wanapata. Bwana Spika, nasimama kuunga mkono hoja hii na mswada huu kwa sababu kwa mara ya kwanza tunaambiwa kwamba wananchi ambao wanahusika na kusimamia mazingira yao watapata kitu, na kwamba serikali sasa kupitia kwa mswada huu kutatokea register ya wale ambao wanasimamia ama wanafanya contribution kwa kutunza mazingira, kwamba wao watapata kitu. Bwana Spika, hii ndio pengine hatua kubwa kabisa imefanywa kwa kujenga mazingira yetu. Kwa sababu hadi sasa imekuwa tu ni kama mwito, watu wanatoa mwito, tukinge mazingira, mwito, tusimamie mazingira yetu yawe masafi, tufanye hivi, tufanye vile, ili tuishi na hali nzuri ya kimazingira. Lakini watu hawaambiwi katika kazi ya mazingira kuna pesa, kwamba ukitunza hiyo miti unaweza kupata pesa. Sasa akili ya mwananchi ikibadilika namna hii, watu wakijua kwamba kusimamia misitu yetu, kupanda miti kuna faida ya kipesa, na kwamba kuna register ambayo itawekwa, basi Bwana Spika, sheria hii itajenga hatua kubwa sana kusimamia mazingira yetu. Bwana Spika, wakati wa mwisho tulikuwa Midrand, Afrika Kusini, na wakati huo ambao Rais Ruto alikuja kuongea na sisi Afrika Kusini, wajumbe wa Afrika nzima walishangilia sana ilipofika mazungumzo ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Kwa sababu sote tunajua nchi ambazo zimeendelea ndizo ambazo zimechafua mazingira, na kwamba nchi ambazo hazijaendelea sana hazina shida ya kuchafua mazingira, na kwamba kulikuwa makubaliano katika mji wa Paris kwamba nchi ambazo zimeendelea zitalipa ridhaa kwa wale ambao, kwa sababu wao ndio waliharibu mazingira, lakini hawalipi kama ilivyozungumzwa hapa na maseneta wenzangu. Hawajalipa na hawatolipa. Sasa kila mtu, wakati tulipokuwa tunafanya ile debate, kila mtu kutoka Afrika, wabunge, kila mtu anasema lazima tuhakikishe wazungu wamelipa, lazima tuhakikishe watu wa China wamelipa, lazima tuhakikishe, lazima Afrika tuungane, tuhakikishe, lazima walipe. Lakini wakati rais aliposimama akasema sisi tuko na rasilimali, badala ya kuomba watu watufanyie, sisi tuweke rasilimali yetu ya kwamba wao walipe nchi za Afrika, ili ile carbon ambao wanatoa kule wailipie, sisi tuweke rasilimali zetu na wao walipe. Kwa hivyo ilikuwa hali ya mpya, akili mpya ambayo inasema kwamba sisi hatutaenda kuomba watu walipe kwa sababu ya uchafuzi wa hali ya hewa. Sisi tutajenga misitu yetu, lakini tulipwe kwa sababu ya kujenga hiyo misitu. Na watu walishangilia kwa sababu waliona ni akili mbadala ambayo imeletwa. Na tunafurahi sana kwamba sasa mashirika, nchi za Kiafrika, nchi za Ulaya, tunakuja hapa Kenya kuja kuzungumzia hili jambo, ya kwamba sisi kama Waafrika sasa hatutakaa kuomba. Sisi tuko na rasilimali, wale ambao wanachafua walipie zile efforts ambazo tunaweka kusafisha hii rasilimali, kusafisha hii anga ambao wale washaharibu. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, mimi ninafurahi sana kuona mswada huu uko hapa mbele yetu, na kwamba wananchi waelewe ya kwamba Senate imekuja kukaa hasusan kwa sababu ya kuhakikisha ya kwamba hii sheria ipitishwe, watu waanze kufaidi, hata kama ni kwa kidogo, watu waanze kufaidi. Tumesikia hapa kuna mashirika ya kutoka nje, Ulaya na wapi, wanakuja kwa kaunti zetu, wanasema wamefanya mambo ya project za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, wamepata mabilioni ya pesa, mabilioni yamelipwa, lakini wananchi hawajui ni namna gani. Sheria hii ambayo imekuja, ambayo Seneti inapitisha leo, itasema ya kwamba kama kuna projects zozote zinafanywa Tana River, zinafanywa kaunti zingine, watu watajua, kuna register maalum ambayo itawekwa, na watu watapata kujua ni project gani na ni pesa ngapi zinaingia kwa community, na watu wanalipwa pesa ngapi kwa zile efforts ambazo wanafanya kutunza misitu na kupanda miti. Bwana Spika, nimesimama kuomba sote ambao tutazungumzia swala hii, tupitishe mswada huu, tupitishe sheria hii, ili wananchi wa kawaida nao waanze kuona faida ya kupanda miti na kuchunga misitu yetu. Kwa hayo mengi, Bwana Spika, ninaomba kuunga mkono mswada huu. Asante.
Now, honorable senators, looking at my screen here, there is a lot of interest from everybody. All senators would wish at least to make some kind of contribution to this motion. Now, under standing orders, each senator has a maximum of 20 minutes to make their contribution. If we move that way, then we are going to listen to very few of you, and most of you are going to be locked out of this debate. Now, under Standing Order 111, a motion for limitation of time ought to have been moved maybe before Senator Wambua took to the floor. That wasn't done. And therefore, under the standing orders, we are tied to the fact that each senator will have to make their contributions for a maximum of 20 minutes. However, through a consensus, we may agree, looking at the kind of interest this motion has generated, we may, through a consensus, agree time within which each senator could make their contribution. We can only do it through a consensus, because a motion on limitation or debate cannot be moved at this juncture. So, honorable senators, do we then proceed with the 20 minutes per senator, or do we strike a consensus? Can we, if we take 5 minutes, we're still going to lock out a good number of you. Can I hear Senator Sifuna on behalf of the minority?
Mr. Speaker, it's my view that 5 minutes should be sufficient to prosecute this matter. And just to add, Mr. Speaker, that I don't think it is a requirement that all senators must speak on everything. In fact, for us, we have a designated expert on climate change, and we would want that he be given priority to speak, so that when we come to other matters, of the street, then others also take that opportunity to
Senator
prosecute.
Sifuna, I'm going by the screen here. From this screen, I cannot pick an expert. I can only pick
But 5 minutes should be sufficient for me.
Senator Omatinga, what say you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would want to suggest that we take 3 minutes. The reason being, most of the things that have been said, we keep on repeating them. If there is that one thing that has not been said, it is done in 3 minutes. Mr. Speaker, so I think we saw yesterday members coming for special sitting and then do not get an opportunity to contribute in the debate. They feel a bit unhappy. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, 3 minutes would be enough without wanting to repeat what has been said. And going by what Senator Sifuna have said, experts will have a filter mechanism of not repeating what has been said. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So then we have 5 minutes, we have 3 minutes. Why don't we meet in the middle? Why don't we meet in the middle and take 4? Okay, so 4 it is. Thank you so much, honorable senators. Senator Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to share on this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, the amendments to the Act is long overdue, and Mr. Speaker, environmental issues are very key in the world now. The world has changed in a big way, and Mr. Speaker, having a climate change amendment bill is one of the most important things in our country now, so that we can align ourselves with the rest of the world. From the weather forecast reports, it is now alleged that we're likely to have El Nino rains, which are usually very destructive. And then later on, we have very many dry spells. We have seen what has happened to other parts of the world, tornadoes, snowfalls, which cause a lot of destruction to what is already existing. And Mr. Speaker, environmental law is one of the major things. It's both local and also international. And is one of the things which tie up the world. We have come up with the new systems which have increased carbon credits. This has not been existing in our law. But the most important thing is the most basic thing. We have cut trees, for developmental issues, for timber. And in fact, we don't have forests in every part of the country. We've got natural forests in the coastal region because of the rains from the ocean and the highlands. In the middle, we have a lot of dry land. And it's important that universities come up with research so that we can know what trees can survive in the dry land, so that the dry land can do a lot of those trees and reduce the speed of wind, and ending up in having more rainfall as it used to be. What else can be done other than trees? There is a planting of a grass, which also covers the surface and slows the movement of water and again slows erosion. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at all those things, there must be a policy which is working. The main policy now is to plant 15 billion trees. There are challenges in that. That doesn't tie with the budgetary allocations. How are we going to get seedlings which are going to cover the highlands and to cover the lowlands and to cover all those different vegetation variations? We don't really have that in place as a policy, and I think we should have, so that the county budgets that something to do with the environment and the change are there, and every county has a policy on how it is going to increase the forest cover in its county, and then also a national policy. Exactly what are we going to do about it? We know that there are plantations which are run in this country, and there are quite few. And when trees get to maturity, there has been an indication that they can be harvested so that we can increase local industry. But unfortunately, we are still getting a lot of our timber from DRC Congo and from even Tanzania. Yet, Tanzania doesn't have a better forest cover than us. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a challenge that other than the talk, we also swing into action and get the population educated as much as possible. And that's why this debate today is very important. Kenyans are following it. They are getting educated. They are getting enlightened. We really need to go back to the schools. And probably the seedlings could be supplied for appropriate climates through schools, so that children can pick seedlings from school and go to plant at home. And that can be done continuously so that we involve the children get to like environment, and again also, we need to come up with a policy. I'm aware that we are doing Thwakenam in Makueni. There is a grand high force dam which is coming up in Tharaka, between Tharaka and Kitui, so that we can supply water in the northern part of Kenya. And without water and without...
Senator Chute.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Today, I'm very, very happy to see this amendment bill before this Senate today. Mr. Speaker, I have already proposed a bill which is supposed to come before this House on carbon credit. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, in Marsabit County, we have wind power project from Lake Turkana Wind Power, which is in Marsabit, in Loengalani, Laisamis constituency. Mr. Speaker, the carbon credit is also called carbon offset. It's a measurable and result-based way of companies to support activities which are governed in other countries by respected regulations. Today, I am happy, Mr. Speaker, we have regulations being put in place to govern carbon credit. Mr. Speaker, carbon credit is worth today $80 US, which is equivalent to 1,000 kilograms of emissions of carbon dioxide. Mr. Speaker, carbon credit is a difference between carbon emission and allowed actual emitted carbon. Mr. Speaker, there are two types of carbon credit. One is those people who emit or pollute our environment. These are a way of being punished by given hefty fees or hefty penalties to pay. The second one is those who are reducing carbon credit or reducing emission. These are called carbon credit. Mr. Speaker, in Marsabit County, we have Northern Rangeland Trust, NRT, who are discounting the carbon credit. Mr. Speaker, I brought a statement before this House earlier, about, I think, 3 months ago, regarding regulation on carbon credit, which are being performed by NRT, Northern Rangeland Trust. Mr. Speaker, my questions were, one, how much money are you getting from discounting our emissions or credit? The question number two, Mr. Speaker, was who is paying for this credit? Number three, who is the brokerage firm? Which is the brokerage firm which is discounting this credit? But we didn't get all the answers. And I'm happy today, Mr. Speaker, this bill is before us today. Clause 4 and Clause 6, 2A and B are very clear that there will be regulation in place. And in this, we are going to get what is rightfully ours. I'm happy, again, today, because it talks about the local community. In Marsabit, Lake Turkana Wind Power is generating this wind or electricity from a place called Sarima. This is a small place which the people of Turkana origin lives. And with this regulation, that means even these people are going to get what is rightfully theirs. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the ward administrators also will be gaining something out of this. They will be in charge of a certain section. Constituency also will be going to be being in charge in the counties, also in the country. Mr. Speaker, finally, let me say this. I am supporting this bill because it affects our people also. It affects the people of Marsabit in many ways because the regulation was not in place. But
Senator Mazzaya.
Asante Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, cha kwanza mimi nataka kusema kwamba naunga mkono mswada huu wa mabadiliko ya hali ya hewa, au kwa Kiswahili sanifu ni mswada wa mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Kwa mara ya kwanza nimejipata mimi nikiona tabia nchi ni climate change katika kamusi, lakini hali ya hewa pia ni mojawapo. Bwana Spika, cha muhimu ni kuona kwamba tumezingatia swali hili katika nchi yetu, na tukisema hivyo ni kwamba hii tabia nchi inaweza kuangaliwa vizuri ikiwa sisi sote tutajumuika kama Wakenya na kuona ya kwamba tumepanda miti ambayo itaweza kulinda mazingira. Bwana Spika, mimi natoka sehemu za Kilifi, na mara nyingi ukienda pande za ufuoni mwa bahari utapata sio kukata miti peke yake katika ardhi, lakini hata ndani ya bahari mikoko pia tumeikata, na baadaye tunaona ya kwamba tunaathirika katika ule ufugaji wa samaki kama kamba ama ufugaji wa samaki wadogo wadogo. Kwa hiyo tunasema ya kwamba ni jambo la muhimu tukizingatia sana hii tabia nchi. Bwana Spika, vile vile nataka kusema ya kwamba Kenya hivi sasa iko katika macho ya ulimwengu. Tumeweza kuona ya kwamba wale wanaotawala katika nchi zao, marais wengi watakuja hapa katika wiki ijayo kuongelea swala hili la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Bwana Spika, sisi tukiwemo kama wale ambao tulikwenda kama nchi tukiwakilishwa katika ule mkutano wa kongamano kubwa lililofanyika kule Paris, tulijiunga na ulimwengu tukubaliana ya kwamba sisi pia tutakuwa taifa moja ambalo litazingatia mambo ya kuangalia hii tabia nchi. Kwa hiyo Bwana Spika, tukiwa katika mazungumzo hayo wiki ijayo, ni umuhimu kuonyesha ya kwamba Kenya iko katika kipaumbele. La umuhimu katika hii mabadiliko ya tabia nchi ni kwamba sisi pia vile vile lazima tuone ya kwamba baada ya kupanda hii miti tutailinda vile vile. Huwezi kupanda miti peke yake bila kuilinda. Tuko na makabila mengi kama aliyotaja ndugu yangu. Kule natoka kuna kabila la Warta. Hilo ni kabila ambalo limeishi na miti, limeishi na forest, misitu, na linalinda misitu. Kwa hiyo hawa watu kama hawa ni lazima, ikiwa kutatoka ridhaa ama kutatoka pesa zozote, ni lazima hawa watu wapewe nafasi hiyo. Nikimalizia Bwana Spika, dakika moja tu, nasema ya kwamba kunao muhimu kuona ya kwamba watu wanaoishi katika hiyo miti ndio watapewa.
Senator Murango.
Asante sana Mstahiki Spika kwa kunipa hii nafasi. Kwanza naunga mkono huu mswada na ningetaka kuchangia kwa njia ifuatayo, kwamba kwa muda mrefu sasa wakazi na wazawa wengi ambao wanaishi katika karibu na misitu hawaja kuwa kifaidika na hizo carbon credits, kwa sababu kuna wale ambao wanachukulia kama hao ndo wanafaa, na zile jamii, hata kama jamii nyingi zimekuwa zikiwa na athari, zikipatwa na athari tofauti kutoka na wanyamapori na mambo kama hayo, kwa muda mrefu hawanja faidika na misitu. Kwa hivyo huu mswada utaleta natija katika wakazi na wazao ambao wanakaa karibu na misitu. Lakini ningetaka pia kuongezea kwamba pia wakati miti inaorodheshwa katika hii mambo ya carbon credit, mimea pia ambayo inalimwa na wakulima kama vile kahawa, minazi, miti, miparachichi, inafaa pia iwekwe katika kiwango cha kwamba pia wao wanapewa carbon credit, kwa sababu ikifanywa hivyo itakuwa pia wakulima wanafaidika kwa njia tofauti, hata kama mazao haitakuwa na pesa nyingi sana. Pia Mr. Speaker, hata kama tunaangalia mambo ya miti, kuna miti, baadhi ya miti ambao tunafaa tuiorodheshe kwamba itolewe pia katika kupandwa, kwa sababu ina athari kubwa. Kwanza inafanya pia hata inaleta madhara makubwa kuliko miti mingine, kama miti ile inaitwa mikaratusi, eucalyptus. Eucalyptus ama mikaratusi ni miti ambayo inafaa kuondolewa, kwa sababu ililetwa pia na wazungu kupandwa katika vinamasi, swamps, kuondoa yale meja ilikuwa mengi ili mzungu aweze kupata nafasi ya kulima. Kwa hivyo tunafaa tuweke taratibu fulani ya kuondoa kwa miti kama mikaratusi ambayo haifai katika kupandwa na wakulima, kama taangalia kubadilika hali ya hewa. Pia katika hii misitu mahali tunapanda miti, hifadhi na misitu, pia wakulima na Kenya wapewe nafasi kufanya ufugaji kama ufugaji wa nyuki, kwa sababu nyuki ni mzuri sana katika usalama, kuangalia usalama wa chakula, kwa sababu wanahusika na pollination. Na kwa hivyo ni vizuri pia wakati ile misitu wale wanakaa karibu na misitu pia waweze, wakati regulations zinafanywa, waweze kupewa nafasi ya kufaidika na ufugaji wa nyuki katika ile misitu. Na nikimalizia ni kwamba ninafurahia kuona pia vijana wakihusishwa katika mambo ya climate change, kwa sababu ukienda kama kwetu vijana wengi sana wamepotea, kwa sababu wanasema wafaidiki na sana kwa upanzi wa miti. Hata kama wamepewa nafasi katika upanzi wa miti, pia katika faida, hata kama ni hifadhi zile zinaitwa conservancy, pia wao wanahusishwa na pia kupata haki yao wakati mgao wa carbon credit unakuja katika nchi hii. Asante sana Mr. Speaker.
Senator Muma.
Thank you very much, your Right Honorable Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute to this debate. Mr. Speaker, it is all agreed, we all agree that this country needs a policy and regulations to assist in governing issues relating to carbon credits. Mr. Speaker, therefore, laws to deal with this issue are welcome. Mr. Speaker, but you must allow me to actually point out the anomalies that we have had. Mr. Speaker, beginning with the procedure, that one day public participation cannot be adequate, cannot be meaningful to something that is as important as this. I know we are trying to ensure that we look good to the international community next week, and it is good for us to look good, but Mr. Speaker, we have actually flouted the rule when it comes to meaningful public participation. Mr. Speaker, we have also flouted the common rule that policy proceeds or precedes legislation. We do not have any policy, and I think Honorable Chute has raised this in this House before. We don't have a policy, a national policy guiding matters relating to carbon credits. And in fact, we have foreign companies and some locals who are benefiting seriously over our national resources, our natural resources, on matters carbon credit. So we needed that national policy, and usually you begin with policy and then you bring in the law and regulations. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I hope that even if this law is passed, that we will agree on the need to come back and regularize some of the issues. And because I have very few minutes, I would want to suggest that we actually relook at some of the things. Mr. Speaker, this law has largely focused on carbon credits and is benefiting mainly, has provided a lot more that will benefit the international community than the communities, the local communities. Mr. Speaker, this law has limited the role of county governments and communities. Even though it makes reference to communities, it is a vague reference to communities. Any community member reading this law will not be clear what this means for them as a community. So I think we will need to revisit this in order for us to do justice, particularly for our communities. Mr. Speaker, we need the people of Kakamega to know whether we have people earning over Kakamega Forest, which they are working day and night to conserve, but somebody from somewhere will all of a sudden take chunks of it and start earning. That is the new style land grabbing, Mr. Speaker, and we need to protect our communities from these issues. Mr. Speaker, clause 23A makes reference to section 6FA that does not exist in this bill. So I do not know what that is. The technical people need to look at it and see how to address that issue.
Senator Oroba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the House that in 1989, Mr. Speaker, and I was just 3 years old then, in 1989, a lady called Wangari Maathai actually stood up and fought. Many men, many honorable men, MPs, including His Excellency, our former President Moi, because she found out about a 62-story building that was going to be put up, a skyscraper in Uhuru Park, and she wanted to conserve the environment. She stood up, she fought these men. They called her crazy. They called her mad. They called her an African, Mr. Speaker, because she was opposing men. But she knew something. She was fighting for the conservation of trees and our environment. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, today I'm 37 years old, and I have the opportunity to stand in Senate and actually listen to probably descendants of the same men who are now supporting that we actually need to do something about climate change and we need to legislate. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, let this be a lesson to the men and the women who are in this house, to our leaders, that sometimes women who stand up in different places, leaders, fighting for a cause, might actually be onto something, Mr. Speaker. They might be onto something that will lead to climate change, to a bill, to an amended bill, so many years down the lane. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this amendment bill, and I want to urge our leaders in this house that they must emulate Wangari Maathai. They must stand up and we don't need to legislate good behavior. They must stand up, sensitize their communities on what carbon credits means, sensitize their communities on what it means to actually benefit in this amended bill. You don't need to legislate good behavior, Mr. Speaker. We just need to inculcate the culture of understanding that even the women in leadership might be onto something. Just like Wangari Maathai was called crazy and mad, and today we are in this house legislating on the roots of the seed that she planted, Mr. Speaker. So I stand to support this bill, and I want to say that as we are legislating whatever, let us not forget that it is that crazy, mad woman called Wangari Maathai who got us to where we are today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddy. Senator Sifuna, what is your point of clarification? And where does it fall in our standing order?
Mr. Speaker, I had requested a point of clarification under Standing Order 126. Mr. Speaker, in the last proceedings I was following, my colleague Senator Cherargei was actually removed from this House under Standing Order 126. And in my reading of that Standing Order 126, it says that a senator removed under that order shall thereupon, without question being put, be suspended from the service of the Senate for a minimum of 91 calendar days and a maximum of 180 calendar days, including the day of the suspension, and shall, during such suspension, forfeit the right of access to the precincts of Parliament, and the Sergeant at Arms shall take necessary action to enforce the order. So the clarification I'm seeking from the chair is whether Senator Cherargei is rightly in the precincts of Parliament, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cherargei did appeal, and he gave valid reasons, and suspended. He's staying away for all that period. So he's rightfully in the House. Yeah. And on the same breath, maybe I was to deliver a ruling on your matter too. And maybe I may proceed to deliver that ruling. You did appeal. I looked at the appeal. It's merited. And therefore, having served 1 day out of the 3 days, you can proceed to continue attending the sessions of this House. Proceed, Senator Eddy.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I just want to be sure that I'm timing myself here, because it's a very important matter. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to matters of climate change, where we find ourselves today as a country, we definitely need to be more scientific, and definitely we need to also rely on data. Because when we review this particular bill, we must be able to look at the journey that we have traveled as a country to be part of this particular bill. And Mr. Speaker, I wanted to comment very fast that the sense of climate change and control of climate issues in our country cannot be without recognizing the fact that fossil fuels has been at the edge of why global warming issues have been a problem. In 1896, Mr. Speaker, a scientist called Svante put a very compelling argument that burning fossil fuels was the major cause of climate change in global south and global north, Mr. Speaker. Nobody paid attention to him until in the 1930s, when other scientists joined this particular scientist, Mr. Speaker, to argue the case for northern US as well as the northern Pacific for what was becoming a major problem. And Mr. Speaker, at that time there was another scientist a British scientist in Europe called Guy Stewart Callender, who was for the first time the first scientist to actually use data and science and mathematical models to argue the case for climate crisis, Mr. Speaker. But even then, he wasn't taken seriously, Mr. Speaker. It was up until 1988, Mr. Speaker, when a scientist called James Hansen, who was a NASA scientist, brought this issue to the UN that actually global warming due to fossil fuels was a major issue, that then the UN responded by forming the first inter-panel on climate change in the 1988, Mr. Speaker. Why am I giving this backdrop, Mr. Speaker? Because the Paris Agreement comes on that backdrop. In 1992, Mr. Speaker, we had the Rio Conference. And in that Rio Conference, Mr. Speaker, many countries that were developed that were causing serious climate problems, including the US at that time, did not participate in making sure that our countries could be compensated, Mr. Speaker. And the Paris Agreement, for which this particular bill comes, Mr. Speaker, that proposes a market mechanism, Mr. Speaker, is an agreement that seeks to enable us as countries to develop our own mechanisms internally, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, while I do support this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the drafters of this bill to actually be able to think critically about the carbon markets, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that we can actually make it more practical to local communities. For instance, Mr. Speaker, if you look at section 23C, we are giving the Cabinet Secretary a full control of a carbon market which does not allow even the Cabinet Secretary to interact with Parliament to be able to ensure that we can be able to have reporting mechanisms to Parliament in accordance to Article 94, Mr. Speaker. So I rise to support, but I would wish to urge us that as a nation, we must think about more practical mitigation, adaptation, and resilience mechanisms that work for us in the context of ensuring that if we don't have legally binding elements by the Western nations to be able to compensate or even to participate in this market, Mr. Speaker, we have our own ways of dealing with climate change. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kinyua.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuunga mkono mswada huu wa mabadiliko wa tabia nchi ama hali ya hewa. Bwana Spika, ni vizuri sana kulinda mazingira Bwana Spika. Na upanzi wa miti ni wa busara sana katika nchi. Lakini Bwana Spika, kile ambacho kimekuwa kinavunja moyo ni kwa sababu katika mtaala wetu wa masomo hawajazingatia zaidi mambo ya mazingira na ukulima Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, nakumbuka wakati tukiwa wanafunzi tulikuwa tukienda tunazuia mmonyoko wa udongo Bwana Spika, lakini kila wakati tukipewa motisha tuliambiwa tusome, tuwe madaktari Bwana Spika, tuwe wahandisi Bwana Spika, na tuwe marubani. Bwana Spika, mkulima na watu ambao wanajihusisha na mambo ya upanzi wa miti na utunzaji wa mazingira haikuchukuliwa kwa muhimu Bwana Spika. Na ndiposa Bwana Spika, wakati huu nchi ambazo kwa kaboni Bwana Spika. Kwa hivyo hata sisi hii sheria ambazo tunapitisha Bwana Spika itasaidia sana, kwa sababu ukitembea kama Laikipia, misitu iliyo Laikipia Bwana Spika, mfano kuna msitu wa Rumuruti, kuna msitu wa mahali kunaitwa Rariak, kuna Mogogodo Bwana Spika. Watu wale wako huko hawafaidiki Bwana Spika na hii miti ama huu misitu ambayo wako nayo Bwana Spika. Ukitembea mahali kaunti ya Kilifi, mahali kiongozi wa wachache ametoka, Stewart Mazao Bwana Spika, tuliwaona wananchi wa zile sehemu Bwana Spika wakisema hawaoni faida yoyote ya ile miti, ile mimbuyu, tayari wanaingoa Bwana Spika na wanaiuza katika nchi za uraibuni Bwana Spika, kwa sababu hawaoni faida yoyote Bwana Spika. Kwa hivyo sasa Bwana Spika, sasa sisi vile ambavyo tuna mswada huu ukipita, tungelitaka Bwana Spika wale ambao wanakuja kutupatia ridhaa ama fidia ya misitu yetu tujue ni akina nani Bwana Spika, tusije tukapata nao watapeli wengine Bwana Spika ambao watakuwa hapa wakija hatujui ni pesa ngapi ambazo zimelipwa, tayari hao wameharibu mazingira yao Bwana Spika. Alafu wakija hapa wao ndio watatuambia watanunua hii kaboni kwa pesa ngapi Bwana Spika. Tunaishi katika hali ya uchochole Bwana Spika, ilhali miti ni yetu, wao wameharibu mazingira yao Bwana Spika. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, hata ijapokuwa najua tutakuwa na hiki kongamano kubwa hapa wiki ijayo Bwana Spika, hayo mambo tuyaongee kiwaziwazi. Namshukuru Rais wa Jamhuri ya Kenya Mheshimiwa William Ruto ameongea kinaga ubaga, ameyasema peupe kimasomaso, na mimi namunga mkono, na mimi na imani ya kwamba haya mambo tukiyafuatilia na tukipitisha huu mswada, watu wetu ambao wana misitu na shule zetu, vijana wametajwa, lakini Bwana Spika, gatuzi zetu zinatajwa katika mswada huu kwa kupitia tu, hakuna jambo ambalo linasemwa kwa kindani Bwana Spika. Kwa hivyo nashukuru, naunga mkono Bwana Spika, lakini Bwana Spika, ni vizuri sisi tufuatilie mambo ya fidia kwa kindani, sio tu kwa makaratasi, lakini kusema na kutenda. Nashukuru Bwana Spika.
Senator Mwaruma.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa hii fursa umenipa ili kuunga mkono huu mswada ambao unapelekea kubadilisha sheria ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi wa mwaka 2016 ama Climate Change Act ya 2016. Nashukuru waziri Senator Soipan Tuya kwa sababu tulipokuwa na yeye mkutano Naivasha wa kamati ya mazingira aliahidi kuweka sera na sheria za kudhibiti uuzaji wa mkopo wa kaboni ama carbon credits. Nilifikiri kwamba ataleta sheria mpya kabisa, lakini katika hekima yake aliamua kubadilisha ule mswada wa tabia nchi wa 2016 kipengee cha 23 ili kuweka udhibiti wa mabadiliko ya tabia nchi kwa ile sheria. Hakuna mtu, Mheshimiwa Spika, hajaona madhara ya kuharibu mazingira ama madhara ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Pale ninatoka mahali kunaitwa Undani, kuna mahali kulikuwa na mito imekauka. Kuna mahali watu walikuwa wanachota maji kwa mfereji, lakini kwa sababu vyanzo vya maji vimekauka, sasa hizo wanatumia magari ama otabuza. Kwa hivyo nashukuru sana, na katika huu mswada ningependa kuangalia kipengee cha 12 ambacho kinapelekea kuweka sera na sheria mufti za kuangalia mkopo wa kaboni ama carbon credits. Kule kwetu utaita Taveta, na nafikiri kiongozi wa walio wengi Mheshimiwa Cheriot alitangaza akasema kwamba mkopo wa kaboni mwingi unatoka kule maeneo ya Kasigau, Taita Taveta. Lakini wale wananchi hawapati faida yoyote. Na nikiangalia takwimu, Mheshimiwa Spika, Savo East na Savo West, ile shamba ni ekari 2,700,000 lililo chini ya Savo. Katika ranches ni 1,200,000 ambayo iko chini ya Savo ranches. Na mkopo wa kaboni unalipiwa, lakini hatuelewi kama wananchi ama kaunti tunafaidi namna gani. Huu mswada naunga mkono kwa sababu unapelekea kuweka peupe bayana kiutalii. Pia kuanzia sasa tukipitisha huu mswada leo, basi tutapata faida kupitia kwa mkopo wa kaboni, Mheshimiwa Spika. Na la mwisho kabisa, serikali za kaunti zimepatiwa kazi katika kutengeneza mipango yake ya miaka 5 ama CIDP. Waweke pia mambo ya kudhibiti mabadiliko ya tabia nchi ama climate change action, ya kwamba tutapanda miti mingapi kama miradi ya miaka 5, na katika bajeti zao waweke mambo ya kudhibiti uharibifu wa mazingira ambao unapelekea mabadiliko.
Senator Tabitha Mutenda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity, and I do rise to support this particular bill. Matters climate are matters that are very passionate to me because I'm one of the advocates, and as a business person, I do produce biodegradable bags in this country, and I really pride in the discussion of climate change, because this is the way to go, not only for us, but for the generations and the generations that will come after us. I want to start by really appreciating none other than Honorable Wangari Maathai for implementation of the Green Belt movement in regards to the advocate of planting trees. His Excellency, the President, as we speak, is also a champion on climate matters, and he has also advocated for tree planting in these countries through our schools. And I would urge in this discussion of climate change, the schools that are visiting Parliament today, we urge them as they go back to be able to continue and practicing tree planting in their schools and also in their homes, Mr. Speaker. I note that as a country, as a capital city, and also as a Nairobi delegation, Mr. Speaker, that UNEP is situated in this beautiful city of ours. And it is a very positive pride that we are hosting this climate summit at this particular time. It's a great honor. As I also have my bill on agriculture in regards to extension officers, it comes at a very good time that I look forward that when this bill will pass, it's going to be very impactful on matters environment, on matters climate, Mr. Speaker. This is because the officers, the extension officers will be focusing on ensuring that good agricultural practices are put in place, both from a digital place, the technology that is in place, to ensuring that we maximally achieve good practices of agriculture. I've had colleagues mention that it is one thing to plant trees. It's another to maintain that tree to its maturity. And I believe through the bill of on extension officers, then we are going to achieve broadly, Mr. Speaker. Discussion on the revenues on credit carbon have been mentioned by colleagues, and yes, I want to support and agree that it is very important that the discussion of revenues is open. Who are the beneficiaries? How much is the level of the sum of beneficiary to our country? The CSR activities in terms of the people living in those particular regions, what is their benefit and how they are benefiting? This discussion should be open, this discussion should be brought to light so that there is maximum benefit. I'm happy that the CBC education is also guiding our young generation in terms of how to do the agriculture, and this extends, Mr. Speaker, not only to the from the school level, but also back to our homes, our regions. And with these good practices put in place, Mr. Speaker, it's going to be very highly impactful. I want members also to have some time, Google me, and you'll find that I have a very unique product that concerns the environment as far as biodegradability of our products is concerned. I do pride in the product that I put in the market in this country. It's one of the products that is changing lives, and I'm happy to be in this particular discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Beatrice.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as a champion of the SDG in the House, I rise to support the Climate Change Amendment Bill number 42 of 2023. And Honorable Speaker, the SDG 13 is about climate action. Honorable Speaker, this SDG particularly calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. And some of the impacts of climate change, Honorable Speaker, is about floods and drought, which are very common catastrophes that face us in this country, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, with floods and drought, we generally end up with poverty and hunger within our country, and of course conflicts that we generally always deal with in the House, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, urgent action on climate change is about saving lives and saving livelihoods, and generally about reducing inequalities in the community. Honorable Speaker, I support this bill as it spells out clear benefits that will be accrued by our communities. It spells out in the amendment about the consultations that will be there with our respective counties. And Honorable Speaker, it also spells out an aspect of good governance because we see that there's enhanced work of the climate change directorate that will be operationalized by the amendments that have been brought forward. And Honorable Speaker, as I support this amendment, I also call out on the ministry and the government at large that as the world moves to COP28, that is the Convention on Climate Change. At the end of this year, our country should be well prepared, the council should be well prepared so that we are able to negotiate more for more benefits to this country. And Honorable Speaker, climate change concerns all of us. I also want to allay fears to some members that have contributed here that the amendment bill also spells out a way in which the Cabinet Secretary will be giving a report to Parliament. And of course, it has only been changed from biannually to annually. So there will be a reporting mechanism that the Cabinet Secretary has to Parliament about issues of climate change. Honorable Speaker, I support this amendment.
Senator Kathuri.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity also to give my remarks on this important bill. And on the onset, Honorable Speaker, I want to support this bill, which is very critical. And Mr. Speaker, actually, what the government is doing is in line with the obligations that is in the Constitution of Kenya, Article 69, 1A, which actually has given the state that it shall ensure sustainable exploitation, utilization, management, and conservation of the environment and the natural resources, and ensure the equitable sharing of the accruing benefits. Mr. Speaker, carbon credit is a huge business. And actually, Kenyans should now know that growing trees and not planting trees, growing trees should be an enterprise because a lot of benefits are in this business, Mr. Speaker. The outside world there, the Western world, has really benefited from this. And unfortunately, Kenya, some communities or some lands, some people have been given some money and there, but the amount of money that they have been given is not commensurate to what they are supposed to be getting. So, Mr. Speaker, these regulations, once enacted, will be able to help Kenyans, those who are in the business of growing trees, to benefit substantially. Because this bill, Honorable Speaker, seeks to provide for regulations on carbon markets. If we get this legal framework, definitely the communities will benefit socially, economically, and also environmental benefits. Mr. Speaker, you know the counties have huge tracts of land. And if the counties can be encouraged really to utilize those bare lands, especially where I come from in Meru County, we have so many hills. If you go to Japan, Honorable Speaker, all the hills in Japan have been rehabilitated and trees are growing there like nobody's business. So in our counties, actually Nairobi is not benefiting from this because the whole of Nairobi is houses. Honorable Speaker, my colleague here, Senator Sifuna, your people cannot benefit from this business. But if you talk to us who have a lot of land, and we get good governors who can be able to communicate and to work with other people, I can be able to assist Senator Sifuna in Meru because we have a lot of hills there which are bare and which need a lot of trees. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with all those who have spoken here. And I want to thank His Excellency the President for taking the lead, especially on environmental matters. In the year 2016, I participated in the enactment of the Climate Change Act, which was Honorable Otichiro's bill, who is currently the governor of Vihiga County. Mr. Speaker, we did a lot to enact that bill. We really went to the depth of that legislation. And Kenya was actually one of the first countries in Africa and almost the 10th in the world to enact the Climate Change Act. And now that we are amending this act, and the president is actually the chairman of the National Climate Change Council. And now also, he is actually the guy who is spearheading the environmental matters. I also take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to welcome the delegates who will be coming to Kenya next week. Kenya is very hospitable. They come for the conference, And as much as possible, also they should go to our national parks, Nairobi National Park, Masai Mara, to the coast, so that they can see the diversity, including the Meru National Park, which is one of the ecosystems.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to also weigh in on this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to say that I support this bill because this bill is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, matters of carbon trading, they are matters which are very weighty, and Africa and Kenya has not been in a better position to take advantage of carbon trading because of lack of appropriate policy and legal framework. So these amendments proposed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, will actually open the channel for Kenya to maximize on its carbon credit potential by ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that we create the appropriate path for carbon trading. We have the appropriate mechanism for regulation of carbon markets. Mr. Speaker, it will also provide an opportunity to have the National Climate Change Action Plan, and also, most importantly, Mr. Speaker, how do people or communities participate in carbon markets? Carbon credit trading, Mr. Speaker, is very, very, very crucial, especially in our counties. And I want to echo the sentiments by Senator Muma that this bill talks very little about how counties can be involved in this process. We do not want counties just to be lumped together with the community initiatives. As a Senate, I think every bill that is presented to us, we must look at it and see what are the interests of the counties in that bill. That's very important. Mr. Speaker, I represent a county that is one of the top 5 counties in forest cover. And if you look at the top 10 counties with the forest covers, they have one significant characteristic. They are all counties which get the lowest shareable revenue. Mr. Speaker, we have counties like Lamu, which are 44% forest cover, Vihiga 36%, Kirinyaga 30%, Elgeyo Marakwet 30%, Bomet 24%. They have a similar characteristics. And therefore, this bill should provide mechanism for counties to benefit through ONSO's revenue from carbon trading. So I look forward for amendments so that we need to ensure that our counties benefit from these carbon markets and carbon trading. Mr. Speaker, this bill also talks about establishment of the National Carbon Registry, where all data, all documents in relation to carbon trading will be stored. I think this is very critical because one of the things that has been lacking is, Mr. Speaker, the issue of awareness, the issue of information dissemination on how carbon trading is going to be done in this country. Mr. Speaker, even as we talk about carbon trading, let us also talk about our policies that promote climate change. Mr. Speaker, I was impressed when the national government announced that they were going to plant I don't know how many billions of trees. Mr. Speaker, that was progressive. But again, Mr. Speaker, that policy was the
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I missed the House. I was away for 1 week when the President was visiting my county, and I followed you online. I want to congratulate you for the good work. Mr. Speaker, I want to extend my congratulations to the Governor of Vihiga, His Excellency Otichilo, for his forwardness in legislation when he came up with this bill, and we joined the National Assembly as the Senate and agreed with them. The amendments that have been proposed are, as Senator Mutua said, long overdue. My take is as follows, Mr. Speaker. That I remember many, many years ago, when I was at Malinya Primary School, we were taught basic science. We were told human beings breathe out carbon dioxide and the trees breathe out oxygen. Then the human beings take in the oxygen from the trees, and the trees take in the carbon dioxide from human beings. At that time, we used to play around with it. But Mr. Muriolo, the then headmaster in Marinya Primary School, would then go further and say, therefore, let nobody play around with Kakamega Forest. Those are many years ago. Today it has become evident that the world is a global biodigester. If we don't fix that biodigester, it will mean we shall live in shit, we shall breathe shit, and we shall eat shit. Mr. Speaker, which is exactly what this bill is proposing. Because of the shortage of time, I would just like to appeal in support of this bill to African countries that now communities that have taken up the lead in this matter should enjoy the carbon credit. Mr. Speaker, if you move from Kakamega County, you go to Nandi County, Vihiga County, and Kericho County, the amount of good that these people have done this republic by protecting forests should be a record in history. Mr. Speaker, because time is coming, let me just do a small rebuttal. There was an unfortunate contribution from a distinguished senator a few minutes ago. I didn't want to waste time, points of order. I want to register a strong rebuttal that Professor Wangari Muta, or rather Professor Madai, was not mad. Professor was the chairman of the Department of Human Anatomy at the University of Nairobi. Some of the people who are making this contribution, we don't even know whether they went to University of Cape Coupe. Mr. Speaker,
Senator Mboni, because I was around, what the Honorable Senator said is that many people confused Professor Wangari Maathai as a man-woman. Confused. Now, because the member is not here, I request that maybe we will check on the answer. Yes. Because the presenting officer is also not agreeing with you.
I have no problem.
So I request we check on the answer, whether that is what she said. And as if she's here to also maybe give the clarification. That a second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. African heads of state will come to this country to seek common rules to tap into the carbon market. And the reason why this is taking place, we want to develop, Mr. Speaker, a common set of rules to govern the benefit that African people will get from the international fast-growing carbon market. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is very refreshing to know that there is such a human traffic coming into this country, and it is a trend everywhere. I was in Mombasa 5 days ago, Mr. Speaker, and I was amazed. All the hotels, right from White Sands, have been pre-booked up to February. Our economy is on the rebound. When I arrived at the airport, Mr. Speaker, there were 2 Airbuses, Lufthansa and Ethiopian Airlines. There were 4 Boeing 777 that were on the ground at Mombasa International Airport. Our country is on the rebound. Members of this Senate, we should be on the front in advocating positive change to the image of the conglomerate called the Republic of Kenya. I support.
Thank you, Dr. Boni. Senator Siengo Karunda Beth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I stand to support this climate change amendment bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill is giving us a chance to combat desertification. It is giving us a chance to tackle land degradation. We know the effects of climate change as extreme droughts, and we know as Africa and Kenyans, we are recipients of what started happening elsewhere. And for this reason, that's why carbon credit has not been of benefit or much benefit to Africans and specifically to Kenyans. We know that carbon credit and carbon market that benefits others who are still the cause of the problem. And Kenyans have not been benefiting because carbon credit became, those who are fighting climate change became a $1 billion industry because of what is happening in the carbon market. Yet, our people are not benefiting. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would say this bill is giving us a chance also to advocate for use of green energy, which becomes a solution to some of the problems created by climate change. I would say, Mr. Speaker, involvement of youth, which is mentioned and also included in this bill, gives us a hope that our youth will be responsible in handling and taking care of our environment. Mr. Speaker, sir, at this point, for the first time, and maybe the only time, let me take this opportunity to thank the President of the Republic of Kenya for leading from the front in the matters of climate change. This is encouraging. I hope all of us will follow suit and ensure that we mitigate on climate change, on the effects of climate change, participating in using green energy, participating in planting trees, participating in really tackling effects of climate change. I support this bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I want to urge my colleagues here that when it is matters concerning this nation, we speak in one voice and move forward together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I support.
Actually, if Senator Beth and requested for more time, I could have ended 1 minute. But now that you have no interest, let us now hear from Senator Sigei Wakiri.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also rise to support the amendment to the Climate Change Amendment Bill 2023, and it is timely, Mr. Speaker. We have had this conversation for a while now, and when we are asked to deal with matters which are of national importance, like what we are being asked to do now, it is important to speak in one voice, as the Honorable Senator Beth has said. Mr. Speaker, sir, in terms of the provisions of this particular bill, I dare say that the devil is in the details. There is so much that we ought to deal with and discuss in this particular amendment bill, but because of time, I know we will be very limited, and we will be brushing through a number of those provisions, which in terms of the finesse in details and also the provision, it would have been very important that we deal with it. Mr. Speaker, 5 minutes is not sufficient enough to deal with this. I am aware I'm losing much of my time in this case. Let me go straight to the proposals which I think are very key and important, which I also must support in terms of the provisions of Clause 4, that is seeking to amend Section 6 of the Principal Act. Mr. Speaker, the introduction of the county governments, the national, and also the public and relevant stakeholders in terms of policy making and involvement is very, very key. This provision is forward-looking because when you look at the previous provision, that was missing, and this is an improvement in the provisions of the law. Mr. Speaker, the provision of Section 7, which is being amended by Clause 5, and more importantly, in inclusion of the youth, is a vote of confidence in the role that the young generation plays. Statistics, Mr. Speaker, provides that 75% of the population of this country comprise people under the age of 35. And this is a confirmation that the President and his team applauds the role that the youth plays. And in this case, Mr. Speaker, it is important that when we are told to grow trees, a large percentage of the people who are involved in that assignment are the generation that is below the age bracket. And their inclusion in this particular amendment is long overdue, is very key, and I support to that particular extent. Mr. Speaker, the introduction of the requirement to have the Cabinet Secretary report to Parliament biannually, that's by the provision of Clause 6, seeking to amend Section 8, in this case, is the only amendment that I would have had and wished that we retain the previous provision that required the Cabinet Secretary to report twice a year to Parliament in terms of the policy, in terms of the status of implementation of such proposals made, in terms of additional responses that might be required of a country to deal with in matters climate change, and also in terms of progress of implementation of both national and international mandates the government is giving. This amendment is reducing that reporting mechanism to once per year instead of twice per year. I believe, Mr. Speaker, there must have been a reason behind it, which reason I would say if opportunity would be availed, we would rather retain the provision of the Act, as it were, for purposes of achieving the mandate that we expect.
Senator Modam Agnes Kavidu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to support this amendment of this bill of climate change. Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very timely bill because many of our farmers and many of our people in our counties have. Mr. Speaker, can I be heard in silence, please? Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that side, a lot of noise is coming. Can I be heard?
Honorable Senators.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's not to noise, Senator Kavindu. They are consulting, but they should consult in a row.
Thank you.
Honorable
Thank you, Mr.
Senators,
Speaker.
Don't make noise.
Thank you. I'm saying this is a very timely bill, amendment for climate change, because where we are heading as a global world is not a very good place. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I raise to support it, I want to raise some issues in my county, which we have a lot of farmers who have planted a lot of coffee and oranges and mangoes. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that these trees also produce a lot of carbon, and that is why we should fully involve the counties so that the counties will also supervise what their farmers are doing in their farms and make sure that they benefit from the carbon credit. Because as they benefit from harvesting the coffee and mangoes and oranges, they should also benefit from carbon credit. Mr. Speaker, many organizations are benefiting from carbon credit marketing in Kenya, while Kenyans are not. And this is a very timely bill because it will put up the structures for these people to trade officially and for our locals to benefit. Mr. Speaker, climate change should be included as one of the key variables in computing the shareable revenue for counties to encourage counties to participate effectively in climate change. And I would also request, like the rest of us, that youth will be fully involved in planting of the trees. And also the forests that are in the counties must benefit in this carbon credit marketing so that we can have on-source revenues from the counties to support our people. Mr. Speaker, I support and I thank you.
Senator Kisang William.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as we welcome the rest of Africa and the world next week to Nairobi, Honorable Speaker, it would have been sad to welcome them to Nairobi and we will not have passed this particular law, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, you remember 2016 is when Honorable Chile came up with the law. We debated, it came to Senate and it was passed. And you know, just like technology, Honorable Speaker, climate is dynamic like technology. So we should be amending the law every year or even every 6 months. I know some of my colleagues have said the time was very short, there was no public participation, and we have not considered well how the counties are going to benefit. I want to report to honorable members that the law is very clear. Within 6 months, we can come back to the House, bring the same law, we do amendments, and we ensure that our counties benefit adequately from this particular law, especially on the carbon credit issues, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, Elgeyo Marakwet County, as Honorable Sotsa has said, Elgeyo Marakwet, like the small counties, we have actually conserved the forest. All of them are above 30%. And we need to find a way where these particular counties will benefit more to increase their own source revenue, including actually, Honorable Speaker, your county, Meru, the percentage of forest cover is above 30%. You should be getting a size of billions, maybe 2, 3, 4 billion from carbon credit. I don't even know, even as Elgeyo Marakwet County, we don't know the beneficiaries of carbon credit from Elgeyo Marakwet County, from the 30% that we have forest cover. I don't know what happened. A few years ago, we used to be around 38%. So I don't know what could have happened to reduce that percentage from that 8 to around 30%. But we are doing a lot of engagement now to ensure we plant more trees, especially in our schools, to ensure we reach the 15 billion that our dear President has told us that we need to increase the forest cover so that at least we can make more money. Honorable Speaker, you know, the Rift Valley lakes, Lake Naivasha, Lake Nakuru, Lake Baringo, have, because of the changes in the global warming, they have increased in size. People have suffered. These are things that are reality, Honorable Speaker. We need to be serious. We need to focus. We need to conserve our forests. We need to plant more trees along the escarpments, like Elgeyo Marakwet County escarpment. We need to encourage our people to stop planting maize or finger millet and plant trees, because in the past they didn't know that you can make money from the forest. Now it is a reality. The regulations that have been put in this law are very important so that our people benefit from the conservation they are doing. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I don't want to take my time. I know many members are on the queue really wanting to contribute because we have been called back from home to come and ensure that we pass this law so that next week we stand tall while we are at KICC as one of the few countries that have implemented and have actualized so that the President may sign the law tomorrow into law. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Shakil Abdallah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this bill, which is very crucial. It's a very important bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we are aware, climate change is real. And this is the long-term shift of temperatures, whereby increase of rainfalls, which leads to floods, and decrease of rain in summer, which leads to droughts. Mr. Speaker, we know the causes of this climate change. It's because of the cutting of the trees, over constructions, which has been the real thing now. All the trees are going down or putting up big buildings. And again, forest fires. All these are the causes of the climate change, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the most crucial thing here is that as we pass this bill and we want to change our environment and improve the climate change, we need also to avoid the projects which contribute to destroying of our environment. Like, for instance, Mr. Speaker, there was a coal project which was coming to Lamu. If we had not gone to court and do the Andamanos, as which is our constitutional right, today we would be suffering with the carbon and all these environmentally destroying projects. So as much as we pass this bill, the government also needs to be aware to reduce and avoid all the projects which are destroying our environment. Mr. Speaker, climate change is real, and the people of Kenya, they need to be educated. The importance of climate change and maintaining our environment. Mr. Speaker, when you go to Europe, when you litter the road or anything, you're fined, because people have really managed their environment. They are taking care of the environment. But you realize here in our country, people, they litter all over. They don't care. They throw rubbish anywhere. And that is one way whereby is contributing to these droughts, all sorts of disease and everything. So we need to take the opportunity. In as much as we put these bills, they would be good in books if we don't educate our people on the importance of maintaining our environments and the importance of the climate change, for them to realize that the climate change is real and we need to take care of our environment. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I support the bill, and I hope it will also help this country to change the way we are looking at climate change and the way we are taking care of our environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Sheikh Mariam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, climate change is a global crisis. To overcome this, we thank and congratulate our President, Dr. William Ruto, for taking front line for this initiative. Mr. Speaker, climate change is a collective responsibility for all sectors in the government. That's why our President is a front line for this initiative. Mr. Speaker, responsibilities for climate change is collective responsibilities for all government sectors, like education, because during droughts, education sectors affect health. There is also, during flood, there is waterborne diseases, which is a sector of health. During flood also, there is a transport system, which is transport ministry, which is affected also. Agriculture is also affected, and also nowadays there is what you call carbon trading, which is under also trade sector. Mr. Speaker, the bills come at the right time for our country to benefit this business called carbon market. Mr. Speaker, the benefits of this bill, the specific objective of this bill is to legislate on carbon rights, carbon markets and trading, qualification of investors in carbon business, project requirements, and inclusive environmental and social impact assessment so as to enable the high quality trading of emission reduction. Mr. Speaker, the benefit of this bill is to support our country to comply with Paris Agreement. It will also help in investment in carbon projects. It actually also add revenue streams for sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, it also help in global training in interest in the forest carbon assets. Mr. Speaker, for this bill, I support, and it comes at the right time when Kenya having a summit. Mr. Speaker, our President, Dr. William Ruto, I congratulate him for that, taking these initiatives and become a front line on climate change, planting 15 billion. As he insists people to plant trees, I urge and request also him eradicate some.
Thank you. Senator Fatuma Du Rwandan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to join my colleagues in support of this bill. Mr. Speaker, this is long overdue because the issues of carbon credit is actually affecting many parts of this country without proper legislations in place. And I wish to thank the President and also the government for this particular initiative. For example, in my county, there is an organization called NRT, Northern Rangelands, in Isiolo County. And I think, Mr. Speaker, you are part of Meru County is also being manned by that particular organization. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this organization is giving bursary to students. But majority of our people, they don't even know where that money comes from. And number two, they also don't even know how much is given to them as far as carbon credit is concerned. And I think once these legislations come into place, we can be able to regulate what is happening as far as that market is concerned. Again, Mr. Speaker, as my colleagues have said, most of these activities are happening on the ground. But if I can look at the current amendment, counties are not involved. And I know very well as far as mineral issues are concerned in this country, counties are left out. And that is where most of activities are taking place. And I wish the government should also look at the possibility of the counties actually being involved as far as this carbon credit business is concerned. It's unfortunate that this bill is very urgent and we had to pass today. But we must look for an opportunity where we can amend and also bring on board the county governments. Mr. Speaker, finally, the aspect of enforcement is also very important so that those who are actually involved once they are violating the right of the citizen, they can be actually taken to court, or members of public should be able to enforce on their rights. Finally, as far as tree planting is concerned, Mr. Speaker, Northern Kenya is mostly affected by the droughts. And I wish the government can put more focus in Northern Kenya as far as tree planting is concerned. It can help so many of our people. So I appeal to the President and also the government, give much focus to Northern Kenya as far as tree planting is concerned. And I know when we were young, we were actually being forced to plant trees in schools. And if we start from there, we can be able to actually take care of our environments properly, so that even the young ones who come up, they will be able to know the importance of tree planting, and they can be able to plant. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I support.
Yes, what is your point of order, Senator Kenya?
Bwana Spika, tumeketi na mwenyekiti wa kamati ya elimu. Bwana Spika, na ni desturi yetu wanafunzi wanapokuja hapa kuwapa motisha, tunawataja tu kwa majina. Najua leo shughuli ya leo ni ya dharura Bwana Spika, lakini ni vizuri Bwana Spika kuwataja tu kwa majina, ndiposa tuwepa motisha Bwana Spika. Wao ndio viongozi wa kesho Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, nasikia watu wengi wakiongea Bwana Spika akisema mambo ni ngumu, lakini Bwana Spika hawa ni viongozi wa kesho, tuwape motisha. Asante Bwana Spika.
Sasa Bwana Senator Kenya, unajua chair wa hapa lazima apewe taarifa ya kusoma. Kwa hivyo ijafika kwangu usiku hata najua kuna wanafunzi hapa. Kwa hivyo kama kuna wanafunzi basi tumewakaribisha sana katika Senate ya Kenya. Nikiwa speaker tumewakaribisha. Asante. Let us have Senator Abbas Sheikh.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to join also my colleagues to support the amendment bill. Honorable Speaker, as you are aware, climate change actually is with us and it's actually a reality. And climate change has really impacted vastly on the pastoralists and the northern Kenyan part of this country. And therefore, you know, these days there's frequent drought, there's unreliable rainfall patterns as a result of the climate change. I therefore want to tell the bill is only talking about paying carbon credit to those who have the trees. I think for those of us who have no trees, we should be paid money from the carbon credit, and then so that they can be.
Just a minute, Senator Abbas. What is your point of order, Senator Karungo?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was not my wish to interrupt the Honourable Senator when he's contributing, but I'm just a little bit concerned, and I would want to have your clarification. I think for transparency purposes, we require a projection of what you're looking at on our screens. Because I remember I came here very early, Mr. Speaker, and I've been pressing my button. It has been on since. I've seen some senators walk in, then they're given an opportunity. And I ask myself, I mean, as a senator of Kiambu, am I not allowed to contribute to this important matter, Mr. Speaker? We would want the projection. We would want the projection of what you're looking at, so that everybody will be knowing who is coming next, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, I've realized there is a pattern, and you ask me, I can bring that pattern of who starts, who goes next, and who goes last, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Karungo, from my screen, you are
second last.
You are ninth on the screen. Remember, you approached me and you told me that there's a time that you are removed from the system.
Yes, when they invited you to speak, Mr. Speaker, so as Senator Kaduri, they pressed my button.
Senator Dangwa, just have your seat. You know, you approached the chair that you are removed from the system when another member was given the opportunity to speak.
Honorable Speaker, let me continue. I think it's because of time.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Now, Senator Karongo, you know, I was trying out to manage you, but now you know you are busting the bubble. So maybe on the horses, there will be some minutes. Maybe you'll get some chance to speak. Can you proceed and conclude, Senator?
Let me conclude my 3 minutes. Honorable Speaker, I think Honorable Speaker, as I said,
Senator Baz, you know, Senator Baz wants to give some very key issues affecting his region.
Yes, very important actually.
Yes, Senator Baz, conclude.
Okay, Honorable Speaker, I think, as I said, climate change has so much impacted on the pastoral areas, especially in the drylands. And what I was saying is that we shall not be paying carbon credit only to those who have trees. We should also pay money to those who have no trees so that they can be able to plant more trees. The pastoralists are most affected. And therefore, I'm saying that the money that's going to be accrued should be paid to the pastoralists. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the bill is saying that there will be community involvement. The communities are not even able to comprehend what this carbon credit entails, actually.
What is your point of order, Senator Veronica Maina?
I think we are having a challenge with the system, Mr. Speaker. I have pressed on this system several times, and it is not even showing on that display. I have reported it to the clerk's desk, and unfortunately, it still does not show. I think we have a challenge with the system, and it needs to be rectified. Otherwise, even some of the senators will never get to speak on this very important matter, Mr. Speaker.
You have noted that your region, from where you are up to the door, there is a problem because most of the senators are not on the screen. So maybe that should be rectified, and I hope the relevant office is now aware that some members are getting injustice. Senator, no. No, you. 1 minute for Senator Baz.
They have taken most of my time, so I think I want some 3 minutes. Honorable Speaker, I'm saying that what we need to is actually the carbon credit payment should be done also equally for the dryland areas so that they can be able to plant more trees. 2, I think the greening of schools should be enhanced so that our children can have we can inculcate the idea of having trees in every place at young ages. Finally, I'm saying the communities, this bill says that the community will be involved, but it has not been said in what part of the community and what is the role of the community. So I think it's a high time that we can empower the counties so that they can be able to receive the money and they can empower the communities, and communities should be involved to plant trees and to get the carbon credit, part of the carbon credit money. As it is now, it's actually only benefiting the few large ranchers and a few of the forest areas, and the money goes only to few individuals. So therefore, I'm saying that this thing, there's a lot of transparency. We must have some transparency. There must be an accountability in the carbon credit money that is being given to the people of the large farms. Therefore, I beg to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sifuna Edwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would rather be discussing the broader issues about the equitable contribution of the African continent to this question of climate change. I believe that we as African states are getting the short end of the climate action because, Mr. Speaker, statistics show that we are only contributing about 4% of global emissions, and yet we are the ones suffering the brunt of climate change. Mr. Speaker, we've just come out of the longest drought in 40 years as a country in Kenya. And although we would want to have that broad-based conversation about equitable global climate financing, we are stuck here with a very minor factor of climate change, which is the question of carbon trading. Mr. Speaker, also allow me to dissuade you from the notion that you made that time you were contributing as a senator for the great county of Meru. That, Mr. Speaker, in fact, even we in the cities can actually benefit from carbon trading, because you should remember that even if you look at the definition of the carbon credits, it's not just about mechanisms that pull out the carbon from the air. it is also preventive measures to ensure that you actually prevent that carbon from getting in the air. And you will know that Nairobi carries a large number of the industries in this country. Actually, some numbers put it at 60%. If we can be incentivized so that even the companies that operate within Nairobi can then look for measures to prevent more carbon being spilled in the air through sequestration and other technologies, Mr. Speaker, we can actually also benefit as the people of Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, just allow me to speak to the positives in this act because there are many negatives that we would talk about in the greater context that I've given. But if you look at 23D, Mr. Speaker, this bill requires that there shall be environmental impact assessment for every carbon trading project. Yes, we understand that greenery or plants are a major way of removing carbon from the air. But it's not every plant or crop that you put up or you plant is going to result in just positives. You've heard the Senator, I think it was Senator Kinyua, talk about the negative effects of planting eucalyptus trees. We have had the complaints of plants such as the Madenge plant in sections of Rift Valley, so that an environmental impact assessment would actually guide us in the best way to undertake some of these projects. You go to Section 23E, Mr. Speaker, that there will be required a community development agreement. I have heard some of my colleagues speak to what the role of the county governments is going to be. Under that particular section, Mr. Speaker, the county governments are given the responsibility of ensuring that they oversee and monitor the negotiations of those community development agreements with the project proponents, which will ensure that the interest of the local populations are taken into account. Under 23E5, Mr. Speaker, you will see that there's a provision there that in every agreement for such projects, 40% of the aggregate earnings shall be reserved for the communities. So those of us who are asking where the communities were going to benefit then can see that the bill has provided for those. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, it is also the responsibility of the county governments and the national governments to enforce the community rights negotiated under those community development agreements under Section 23E, so that the county governments have a great role to play and also the communities have a lot to benefit if indeed these projects are undertaken in the right manner. Of course, for me, I would like better clarity on how we access these markets, especially for private individuals, because the bill only talks about private entities and public entities. We would like even individuals who undertake these projects to have access to
Senator Tobiko Pelis.
Finally. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support, the enactment of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I think we cannot overemphasize the importance of, a bill that redeems our situation in terms of climate, because we have suffered a lot, harsh climatic conditions and changes that have become so irregular and unpredictable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even because I see the emphasis on this bill is about carbon credit and monetization of the whole, tree planting and forest conservation. Even as we do that, Mr. Speaker, I would say that it's very important that we have our forests, we have our clean environment, and if having economic value out of it is possible, then that's good. But it must not be the overriding factor, Mr. Speaker. We must still, have our environment, whether we are having money from somewhere or not. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to generations to come, Mr. Speaker. We must keep our environment, sustainable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the counties that have, pastoralist counties that have faced a lot of very prolonged droughts, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you we have seen the harshest part of climate change, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have had a chance to compare of late, when we were in Uasin Gishu the other day, and compare Uasin Gishu and